Good morning, everybody. And happy Mother's Day, ladies. I hope every mother sitting in the room and joining us online spends the day feeling as treasured and as cherished as you are. Wasn't that a sweet video? Oh my gosh. I love getting to preach on Mother's Day because it gives me an opportunity to say out loud how thankful I am for the two that made me a mom. Check this out. I tell you what, man, we are so blessed. Oh, in fact, check this out. It's my Mother's Day present to myself, by the way. Some people only dream of meeting their favorite performers. I'm raising mine. Oh, I love it. And parents, maybe you're like me. Maybe you've had a whole list of things in mind that you've wanted to make sure that you taught and instilled in your kiddos. Now, for me, won't be terribly surprising to many of you, I am not personally skilled in many manual labor types of things, or, many domestic things for that matter. And so when I think of the list of things that I want to raise my boys to know and do, my list ends up starting something like this. Listen, boys, you don't have to know how to do the thing. You just have to know somebody who does, right? Like, you don't need to know the answer, but you do need to know how to find the answer. And maybe that sounds like a little bit of a cop-out. So here's a few things that actually are on my list. It'll come as no surprise that it is paramount to me that my boys grow to know, love, and follow Jesus. It's paramount to me that they continue to do things, go places, meet people, and develop habits that help them become all that God created them to be. See, I'm not the kind of person that says, you can be anything you set your mind to, because for me, that just was super overwhelming. Instead, I'm the kind of person that says, Ephesians 2:10, right? You boys were created with great intentionality to do great things that God specifically designed for you to do, and he did that long before you were even born. So figure that out. Run in that direction. Chase hard after that. And when I think about what I want for them in the context of what we're learning about together this month, this idea of Midwest nice, right? This need for kindness, the thing I most want for them is to be people of integrity. I want them to be people whose inside matches their outside. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you heard somebody say, oh, bless your heart? And you have to say it that way too, with the click and everything. Bless your heart, right? I was born in Michigan, but I spent the first 5 years of my life in the Deep South where phrases like that are prevalent. So I grew up thinking, bless your heart, was just filler, right? I didn't think it meant anything, just a way for people to fill conversational space, right? But then I got a little bit older and I realized, oh my gosh, it actually means a lot of things, and many of them not terribly nice. I ran across a video the other day of comedian Angela Johnson unpacking her introduction to this reality. So check this out and laugh with me.
Somebody told me this. They were like, hey, when people say bless your heart, they can mean it in a good way or a bad way. And I was like, what? Like, how you do a bad bless? And they're like, no, trust me, sometimes that's not what they mean. So now, anytime somebody tells me bless your heart, just to be safe, I reply with, bless your heart. Yeah, I wish you would bless my heart. Bless it again, go ahead.
I love her. Bless your heart is just one example of Midwest nice, of saying one thing when you really mean something else, of presenting an image on the outside that does not match what's going on in your heart. Now, I'm actually a huge proponent of the idea that you will always far sooner act your way into a feeling than you will ever feel your way into an action. That to say, when something needs done, you get up and start doing it, and eventually you might feel like doing it, right? But if you wait to do something until that thing needs done, or until you feel like doing that thing, y'all know it's not getting done, right? So, I'm all for that, but The idea of acting my way into a feeling, that conveys intentionality. I may not feel like doing the right thing, but I know it's the right thing to do, so I'll do the right thing until my feelings catch up. Midwest nice, on the other hand, is just fine saying one thing and meaning something entirely different. So not surprisingly, the Bible has something to say about that. In the book of Colossians, chapter 4, verse 6, tells us let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Now, just out of curiosity, I asked ChatGPT the other day to explain that verse to me. Now, admittedly, a lot of that verse doesn't need explaining, right? I mean, conversation that's full of grace, that could be just as easily said, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? I mean, there's a difference between, I love you, and I love you, and even, I love you, right? And conversation that's seasoned with salt, well, we know salt does a couple important things, right? It preserves and it enhances flavor. So let's just not have bland conversations. How about that? Let's be thoughtful and meaningful with our words. Let's make sure our words add value. But it was the last part of that verse that ChatGPT's answer made me kind of raise an eyebrow. Like, really? The part of the verse that says, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Even ChatGPT had this to say. The goal isn't just being nice. The goal is about being wise and appropriate in how you respond to different people in different situations. Even ChatGPT knows that. I want my boys to be people of integrity. I also want them to be people of peace. Now, the Midwest nice version of peace kind of sounds like this. Well, of course I forgive that person. All the while, I'm secretly harboring and grooming and growing the tiniest of inconveniences until they're big enough to wrap myself in. But that's why, also in the book of Colossians, chapter 3, verse 12, tells us, don't do that. Instead, clothe yourself with kindness. The verse reads this way. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy, which just means set apart, means I'm not doing things the way the world dictates, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. It says bear with each other, which just means put up with each other, tolerate each other's little oddities and eccentricities, right? Just put up with it. And if there is an actual grievance, forgive like the Lord forgave you. The older I get, the more I long for that kind of peace. Not just some fabricated Midwest version of everybody gets along because we're all too afraid to say anything meaningful and have it get misconstrued. I mean the kind of peace that comes from doing things God's way, with compassion and kindness that cause us to go out of our way for people, with humility that keeps us teachable, with gentleness and patience that keeps us from getting needlessly offended by those little oddities and eccentricities, right? And then when there is something worth getting our feathers ruffled over, we're quick to forgive the way Jesus forgave us. I want my boys to be people of integrity and peace. Another thing on the list, I want them to be people of kindness. In the New American Standard Bible, Micah 6:8 reads this way. He has told you, mortal one, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Micah, as it turns out, was a prophet from a small rural town. Does that sound familiar? That gave him a sharp eye and a meaningful perspective for how those in positions of power were actually exploiting ordinary people like him. Community leaders and judges were corrupt. Business owners were dishonest. The wealthy always found ways to take land from the poor. And even the religious leaders made their living not speaking the truth, but rather saying only what the people wanted to hear. And then here comes Micah on the scene with this wake-up call of a message that says, hey, guys, God cares very deeply about how people treat each other, and most of y'all are on the wrong side of this. Now, a couple things here. If you are a person who happens to be in a season of wondering exactly what God wants for your life, remember this. When God has a specific task or direction for you, he will make it uncomfortably clear. I don't imagine Jonah sat in the belly of the whale scratching his head wondering how he got there, right? But God also gives his kids lots of latitude. So if there isn't a specific direction from God and you're still wondering, like maybe he's opened maybe 2 or 3 different really good opportunities for you to choose from, then verses like Micah 6:8 are actually a really good place to start. It's like God is saying, listen, whatever you choose to do, just make sure that you're prioritizing justice, you're being people of kindness, and you're walking with me in a teachable way. And if you happen to be a person who just enjoys finding patterns in the world, the entire book of Micah is a great read. Micah's whole message is just one giant cycle that repeats throughout his book. Judgment, warning, hope. Judgment, warning, hope. The judgment, here's what y'all are doing wrong. The warning, here's what's coming as a result. But there's hope. There's nothing you've done that God can't redeem and won't restore. And isn't that exactly what kindness is? Yeah, you messed up. Of course there's consequences. But your story doesn't end here. And kindness, isn't just between you and me. Kindness actually goes lots of different directions. When I say I want my boys to be people of kindness, I want them to be kind to God's creation. Genesis 2:15 says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So, yeah, let's reduce, reuse, recycle. Let's stop wasting energy and water. For the love of God, turn out the light when you leave the room. Amen. Let's go out of our way to avoid and address pollution. Why not plant a few trees? Why not help protect wildlife habitats? Let's better educate ourselves on how it all works together and even how we benefit when the world works the way it should. Let's be good stewards of what God created and then entrusted us with. I want my boys to be kind to creation. I also want them to be kind to themselves. Rob and I, we were just a few years into ministry when the Lord blessed me with a conversation that has literally safeguarded my heart and my mental health for the past 25 years. At the time, my boss's boss, former pastor and missionary, Dr. Don Bray, he stopped by my desk one day just to ask how Rob and I were doing with our church plant, what God was teaching us, how things were going, and how he could be praying for us. And in that moment, I shared with Don how I was struggling in that season with feeling disingenuous when I realized that people I was ministering to felt closer to me than I felt to them. I felt like I couldn't get around to everybody fast enough. I couldn't be present enough for everyone in meaningful ways. And that was in a church of less than 50 people. Don let me share a few examples as he snagged a pen and a sheet of paper from my desk, and he starts drawing this series of concentric circles. It looks like a target. And he says to me, so you're telling me you want to live and love like Jesus? I said, well, yeah, that's kind of the goal. And he says, well, here's how Jesus did it. And that's what he drew for me. Now, the outside circle, he goes on to explain, is 5,000. John chapter 6 is one of the places we see recorded where Jesus feeds thousands and thousands and thousands of people, people that had a need that he met, people that all knew who he was. They all knew he was Jesus of Nazareth. They knew what he was capable of, but let's be honest, if he wasn't God, he wouldn't have known all their names. That next circle in is the 72 apostles that we read about in Luke chapter 10. After Jesus commissioned the disciples, these 72 were the ones, the Bible tells us, Jesus appointed and sent 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place that he was about to go. These were the ones who'd been around Jesus enough to know what he was capable of. They were familiar with his heart and his mission, and they were passionate about helping build his kingdom. So, yeah, a little bit closer to Jesus than the 5,000, right? Then the next circle was the 12. Of course, that was the 12 disciples. This was the group he did life with day in and day out for 3 years. There were measures of familiarity and friendliness and trust with this group that those outer layers wouldn't have experienced. There were ways that this group of 12 actually helped meet Jesus' needs and not always only ever the other way around. But of those 12, the next circle in has the number 3 on it. That was Peter, James, and John. We see Jesus occasionally taking these 3 aside. In Mark chapter 9, we see these fellas got to be present at Jesus' transfiguration. These were the 3 that were given a glimpse of Jesus' deity. These were the 3 that got to hear the voice of God the Father audibly say, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." These 3 were part of Jesus' life in far deeper, more meaningful ways, even than the other disciples. And then there was another circle right in the middle that had the number 1. Because at the end of the day, who was Jesus closest to? When he needed a measure of refueling that wasn't going to come from any other place or any other person, Luke chapter 5, verse 16 tells us that Jesus often withdrew and went to solitary places to pray. Now, after walking me through this illustration, Don asked me a question that has helped me create healthier expectations of myself and others. He said, "So, did Jesus lack integrity just because someone on his 5,000 circle had him on their 3 circle?" He said, "Even God doesn't treat everyone the same." Whew. I want my boys to hold loosely to the expectations the world places on them, but I also want them to hold loosely to their own misguided expectations of themselves. I want them to remember what we read about in Matthew chapter 11. God's yoke is easy, and his burden is light. I want them to be kind to creation. I want them to be kind to themselves, and of course I want them to be kind to others. But like we just saw, not all things are created equal, right? And remember, like we learned last week, nice and kind are not the same thing. I would even suggest there ought to be a difference between how we are kind to each other as fellow believers and how we are kind to those who don't yet know and follow Jesus. So, follow me here. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a fellow believer is to look them in the eyes and lovingly say, "Listen, since neither political party has cornered the market on doing things God's way, if every single one of your strongly held political perspectives falls extremely in either camp, you can say you follow Jesus, but it's actually your politics behind the wheel. I'm not saying Jesus isn't on your bus, but he sure ain't driving it." And for people who don't yet know and follow Jesus, kindness looks like all the things that New Hope's Everyday Ambassadors learned about in our cohort this last spring. Kindness looks like noticing, listening, asking meaningful questions, building bridges, creating familiarity so that the next time that person's life gets upside down, they know someone who knows someone that can make all the difference. Out of curiosity, do you know what the word kind even means? Do you know where it came from? Because I had to look that up. It actually stems back to the Old English word for natural or innate. And that word, however you say that word, I wasn't even going to try, but that word evolved from the old Germanic word for family, which we know is the word kin. So, kind originally meant behaving in a way that's natural to one's family. As a fruit of the Spirit, kindness might not come naturally. It might be something that we have to trust the Lord to build in us and display through us. But it ought to be the hallmark of a Jesus follower. It ought to be what we're known for. We ought to be people who are known not just for our niceness and politeness, but for our authenticity, our genuine kindness. I want my boys to be people of integrity, people of peace, people of kindness. And then I also want them to be people with a story to tell. It was on April 12 in 1961 that Soviet pilot and cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person to journey into outer space. Traveling on Vostok 1, Gagarin spent 108 minutes completing one orbit of the Earth. What a remarkable, life-changing experience. But because Russia's national religious position was atheism, Gagarin returned to Earth, attempting to confirm that atheistic position by saying, hey, I went up into space and I didn't see God. Well, it turns out C.S. Lewis was alive at the same time, and in response to Gagarin's statement, Lewis wrote an essay called The Seeing Eye, and in it, he had this to say: if there's a God, you wouldn't relate to him the way a person on the first floor relates to a person on the second floor. You wouldn't get to see him just by going up. Lewis said, if God is our creator, we would relate to God the way Hamlet would relate to Shakespeare. But how is Hamlet ever going to know anything about Shakespeare? It's not like Hamlet can look around the stage and see him standing there. Hamlet only gets to know Shakespeare if Shakespeare writes himself into the story. And guys, that is literally what our Creator did for us. Our Creator wrote himself into our story. He put on skin and he moved into the neighborhood. He literally made it possible for us to know, love, and follow him. And as we do, the changes, the benefits, the blessings that we experience, not just when we die, but here and now as well, those blessings and benefits, those weren't meant to end with us. God wrote himself into our story so we'd have a story worth telling. Maybe your story is all the things God saved you from. Maybe your story is all the things God kept you from. Your story might feel like it falls closer to mundane than miraculous. But if God has done a work in your life, if you know what it means to have forgiveness that you didn't earn, if you know what it means to have a peace that makes no sense given your situation, your story needs told. If we go back to that passage in Colossians 4 and look just one verse earlier, Colossians 4 verse 5 says this: be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. The contemporary English version of the Bible says it this way: when you are with unbelievers, always make good use of the time. Let's tell our story as opportunity arises. But keep in mind, you're never going to argue someone into heaven. You're never going to convince someone that following Jesus is the right decision by browbeating them or twisting their arm or even winning the debate. It's like screaming at your apple tree and expecting it to grow more fruit. But how about we let God do what only God can do? And let's let our salty conversation make people thirsty for more. So when they say, oh, come on, what is it about you? Then our answer can be, I'm so glad you asked.
This is the moment.